Once that we understand what the living income is in that region, what is the actual income in average, we know what the living income gap is. That is the living income gap that we need to close so the farmers achieve the living income. This is the living income benchmark, what they should have for like decent housing, decent food, all of that. This is the actual income. We need to close that gap. How do we close that gap? And I think that's what it makes the task force of the ICO unique.
Friends, we have an announcement. On October 28, 29 and 30, Map It Forward is proud to present the first of its kind live online event titled Introduction to Regenerative Coffee Farming. This workshop will happen live in 3 different events in English, Spanish and Portuguese to help coffee producers and the rest of us in the coffee industry understand regenerative ag and how to implement it so that coffee farmers stand a chance at surviving these brutal weather conditions long into the future. It will also help us understand how we can talk about regenerative ag to our customers. This live online presentation will be led by highly specialized and experienced agronomists, coffee producers, and agricultural engineers who have worked transforming coffee farms from conventional farms to regenerative farms and agroforestry around the world. Tickets are $10 for coffee producers and $150 for everybody else. When you pay $150 though, you're securing your ticket and the ticket of 14 other coffee producers that didn't quite have the funds to pay for their own tickets. Not only does your ticket buy you access to the workshop, but it also gives you access to newly formed WhatsApp groups, one in English, one in Spanish, one in Portuguese, where people can continue to exchange information and ideas about regenerative ag before and after the workshops. For more details, head to mapitforward.coffee/workshops. Check the link in the show notes for details and help us spread the word about this workshop by sharing our posts on social media. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 2 of a 5-part series with Miguel Zamora from the ICO. We are talking about a living income for coffee producers. Now, folks, if you listened to the last episode and you thought, oh my God, that was so much information, I want you to go back and listen to it again. I believe that our industry does not understand the potential role that the ICO can play in our everyday lives in the industry. And I'm not even sure that the ICO knows that either. But what I do know is that everybody I asked, from the time that Miguel and I had a preliminary conversation to today, it was a couple of weeks, everyone I asked, what do you know about the ICO? Everybody said, I've heard of them, I just don't know what they do. And I'm in that camp as well. And so we need to, as we approach this coffee crisis and continue to look for solutions, in my research for this series, what I came to realize is there are a lot of synergies between what small business is doing and what the ICO was trying to solve problems for. And so I think that the information that the ICO is releasing could be of benefit to small businesses. The reports that the ICO are releasing could be helpful to people. So we need to shorten the distance of what the industry understands about who is there to help and who is actually there to help. So if you were in the last episode, you didn't understand a lot of the terms, listen to it again, stop and restart, rewind. For those of you who are old enough to remember what a cassette was, I'm sure you know what that is, Miguel.
The tape was
with the pencil. Oh, the blessed pencil and rewinding the tape. Anyway, now we're both showing our age. But yeah, take some time because these conversations are important. And they may be, for those who are saying, what do I want to do after I'm a barista and after I've got a degree and I want to do something important in the industry? Well, the ICO may be somewhere you want to go and work one day. So consider these kinds of conversations as being really important to not just this version of yourself, but perhaps the version of you that exists in 10 years from now. So Miguel, you are, as we spoke about in the previous episode, the Coffee Public-Private Taskforce coordinator. And a big part of what you do is you are focused on a living income for coffee producers. Where I want to start this conversation is, what's the difference between a living income and a living wage for coffee producers?
Sure. So wage comes from salary, which is, in my case, I get paid a salary, right? Most of us who work in coffee get paid a salary because we don't, own the means of production. We don't own, the companies, organizations that where we work. But in the case of farmers, they farm and they receive income from the products that they produce. So they don't receive a salary from the company, right, that they pay them a salary, or the owner of the land who pays them a salary for farm. So that is the difference. And the term living wage is usually used for workers, right? And it's used beyond farming too. It's used, the initiative for living income here in the United Kingdom. That tend to be private in many places, right? So that is the difference is about what the farmer receives because of the products that they sell. We call it income, and we refer to that. Now, what is a living income? Because there are different references, right? When you see, a study, you see the level of poverty is X in this country, right? So farmers should have at least go beyond that. But the farmers need to go way beyond that. They need to go beyond a living income. But we use that as a reference to start. What I mean with that is an income that allows the farmer and his or her family to be able to have access to decent housing, right? The housing that is proper, like a proper roof, like a proper floor, right? Like something that we, in that definition of decent changes, as you can imagine, country by country, reality by reality. That's what the living income is really regional, very specific to a region or to a country when it can be extrapolated because it depends on the sense of what is a decent housing there. What is a nutritious diet, a model diet for that country that is nutritious, right? And it depends also country by country, region by region, depending on what is available there. So when we figure out what is that, the researchers that go to, some cases, hundreds of markets to figure out prices of whatever it is, potatoes, manejo, yuca, whatever that is, plantains, to figure that out. That allows also the families to have to cover other expenses, like school supplies and other things that they need in their family, and give a little bit of a space for emergencies, as we all tend to have in our families. So all of those components together represent what we call the living income benchmark for that region. So it changes country by country, region by region, depending on the cost of having decent housing and nutritious food, and be able to provide all of the other things that you need as a family and have a little bit of an emergency. So we work with researchers of local governments, in many cases in producing countries, with independent researchers, with a lot of organizations that globally work on this topic to try to understand what is the living income benchmark in a region or in a country. We talk about region, think about, Oromia, Sidama, right? Think about Minas Gerais, right? Like within the country, the coffee region. And this information, and this process really, it can take time. It can take over a year, in cases more, because part of what we do is transmitting information about what living income is and why this is a reference that can be important, that it can help to compare in different ways and how it will be later used. That process helps everybody, different stakeholders, to come together around the idea of why a living income is important and why we need to understand it. So it helps to create a process. In addition to that, why we want to know what the living income is not for the sake of having an idea, but because we want to understand how far the farmers, the family, are to that when we take into account their actual income. Their actual income comes from the coffee that they sell, minus the cost of producing that coffee. Additionally, any other income that they may come from the farm, because remember, many farmers are farmers and then grow coffee. They're not necessarily only coffee farmers. They may have chicken, they may have, depending on the place, plantains, right? So that additional income, any off-farm income that they may have, if they have a time available and opportunities to work as a farm worker, in many cases in other coffee farm, and they get paid for that, or somebody else in their family gets that income, and any other income. The places that you get remittances, you get, income from family who is outside of the country, essentially that. So we try to understand all of that too, again, with the local researchers, with local cooperatives, civil society organizations, in process that take several years in reality, but a process that help us to build the necessary blocks for later, what comes later, which is the key part of the work. So once that we understand what the living income is in that region, what is the actual income in average, we know what the living income gap is. That is the living income gap that we need to close so the farmers achieve the living income. This is the living income benchmark, what they should have for like decent housing, decent food, all of that. This is the actual income. We need to close that gap. How do we close that gap? And I think that's what it makes the task force of the ICO unique. We work with the governments and companies and civil society in those countries to create those strategies that will be part of a national coffee plan that will help them to close the living income gap. Now, what strategies could it be? It really depends country by country, because it cannot be something that it is decided from outside place by outside players. It has to be something that the local government, the local organizations, the local private sector have to figure out. It can include things such as productivity, right? That's a popular one. Let's grow more coffee in a better way. We use better resources, so you have a better income. That can be part of that. It can be around purchasing patterns, purchasing practices. It is a little bit about price, but it's not only about the price paid by whoever buys the coffee, but the price that actual farmer receives. What is that efficiency in the price? How much of that price actually arrives to the producer and why? So understanding that, figuring out what else can be done so the farmer receives more. It can be around diversification, helping the farmer to grow other things in the farm beyond coffee, so it has income from different sources. So there are different ways and different strategies that can be taken at that country that the country needs to figure out and decide that will help them measure how the living income gap closes. But we have built over the years the information that we needed to make decisions that are informed about how we can close the gap. And what we do is we try to model how those different strategies will close the gap. If we increase productivity by 50%, this will be the impact of the living income gap. If we can figure out a plan that helps farmers to apply fertilizers in a way that is cheaper, it will close the living income. If we have a diversification plan, so little by little, we can figure it out. Once that plan exists, that has been created again, after years of a process of finding the data, the evidence, and now coming up with the strategies, governments need to fund that, need to find ways to make those investments. And we try to help them with the convening power of the ICO to connect them with international organizations that can help to fund a big productivity project, right? With organizations that might be working on this, that might fund this, so that if productivity is a key issue in that country, they can make those investments, because we know that rehabilitation of farms takes money, bringing new varieties, takes income away from farmers for a few years. So how to fund all of that is also part of the larger work that we try to do. So in many ways, it's a lot of work at the local level, but it's also a lot of work at the global level to try to make those connections. And at the regional level, now we talk about regional, talk about different countries in the same region, right? Because we work with different coffee networks and platforms at a regional level, so the learning from one country can be applied to the neighboring country. The different agronomists and technicians can share knowledge and can learn from each other. So we try to also approach the topic from the perspective. That's how we work on living income. At the end of the day, our goal in this topic is that we want that at least by 2030, which is coming along very quickly, at least half of the producing countries that are members of the ICO, we have 42 producing country members and like 20-something consuming, but at least half of the 42 producing country members are implementing already initiatives as part of the National Coffee Plan to close the living income gap in their countries. That is very ambitious. That is really big. And that includes countries such as Togo, Angola, but also Honduras, right? That includes working also with a lot of different partners all over the world, globally, regionally, but also the country level, to be able to achieve something that massive. But we are making progress. It's been a lot of years to get us to this point, and right now we are starting to focus in a couple of countries, such as Mexico, that has been the most advanced, but other countries that have been doing a lot of work on this, such as Togo, Indonesia, Honduras, Ethiopia, who come along also to try to understand first this living income gap and figure out how to implement initiatives that can help them to close the living income gap.
You raise Ethiopia there, and I'm not singling Ethiopia out. The reason I want to ask you a question that's related to all of the countries, but we recently did a series on Ethiopia and some issues that are happening over there with regards to eucalyptus, etc., etc. My question is, how does the ICO know that the people who are representing the governments are aligned with the best outcome for coffee producers?
I think that there is, like, just when you work with any partner, I see that there is trust that you need to build over time. There's also, in our case, they are our member. We work with them, and we trust that the people from Ethiopia make their voices heard, and they, like a government that sends a representative to us. We cannot provide any role of beyond that. Now, when we work with different partners that fund different projects in specific countries, all of these partners also implement a due diligence process to try to understand that the funds that they are going to be providing are going to be used properly, right? And that exists in any major organization. So that there are points in the process in which different partners may check different things around the different other partners with which they are working. But we assume, as an organization, the members, we assume the best scenario always, because unless we have a reason not to. But and I think that is also a key part of, the general coffee discussion, right? Because we can say the same thing about consuming country members or consuming countries in coffee that might not even ICO members.
1,000%. 1,000%.
Exactly. So I think that is part of just the general discussion. You have partners, you work with different partners, you have to trust. You can have different approaches to that, and there are due diligence things that usually happen when funds are provided, not by ICO, we don't have funds, but we work, again, as a key connector, and those organizations provide that to figure out where their investments make sense. Right? So that's how we approach it.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, there is a baseline assumption that the governments that you're working with are working from the position that their agenda is to make, for example, with this task force, make a more livable, create an environment that has a more livable wage, livable income for coffee producers. But there's a base assumption there. Is there any follow through or investigation to see or is there any kind of penalty that happens to countries who don't meet targets that are set as when you all come together and come and form an agreement?
I think that just in general, I would say two things. One, these countries are our members, so they're key, our, reason to exist. So we treat them and work with them like that, right? Like that. Mm-hmm. Reason why we are here. Now, there are many times during the process that lasts many years, as you can imagine, governments change, right?
100%.
The government change, we tend to have sometimes difficulties or issues because the representative is a different person, or they may have a different idea of how they want to approach an issue. So I'm only calling hiccups like that, but that is just part of working with a government in any country. So those situations exist, and then we reassess, we accommodate, and we work. But overall, I can say that we have been able to work with them. Now, I've only been with the organization for over a year, but I know that overall we've tried to find ways and we find ways to continue making the progress. And at the end of the day, it's like there might be, that's kind of like something that may make it difficult to work with a government because governments change. But the power of the potential that you have to address any sustainability issues in coffee with the government, I mean, it's huge. We had a discussion. We had a great meeting here a few weeks ago with a lot of the companies that are part of the task force. We're here, and you ask them why do you participate in this, and tell you we want to work on living income. There are things that we can do. There's some things around pricing. There's some things but if you go in a region, the roads do not work well for the farmer to take out their coffee, and that increases transportation costs. Or there are policies that increase transaction costs. There's a big opportunity there that working with the government, we can go a lot farther than just working alone. And I think that that's a big reality when you think about coffee institutes, about research that can support the country, about finance, about futures market in the countries. The case of Brazil is a great case of what coffee could be in a producing country. Investments of decades in education, in the universities, right, to educate agronomists, to create the necessary information so good agricultural practices are applied, the fact that exists a futures market there for coffee, that there's insurance, many cases, that there have been policies and research that have supported farmers over decades, and many farmers there are profitable, right? That happened in big part because the government invested there for decades. Different governments, different size, right, of the political spectrum, but they saw that as a key opportunity. Just to put an example of what it could be.
But also, having said that, there is another side to that, which is as we have monocropped for so long in countries like Brazil, and regenerative agriculture is something that needs to be done, big corporations are going to lose out if regenerative agriculture and agroforestry is the direction that coffee farmers realize that they have to take. And because of that loss that's going to be taken to big ag, we're already starting to see that government is stepping in with legislation to prevent that from happening, or at least to make it more difficult. One example of that is the laws that are coming in that are going to prevent biofabricas. Biofabricas, folks, are when a coffee producer has the ability to take the bacteria that naturally exists and the fungus, et cetera, in the forests that are on their land, multiply that and spray it or somehow get it into their soil so that they can improve the natural the soil's natural ability to rejuvenate its own nutrients, so that the bacteria is producing the nutrients, the nitrogen, the potassium, et cetera, through its proliferation. So through multiplying, it gets to feed the soil itself instead of using fertilizers, chemical synthetic fertilizers. This is this intersection where I think that it seems really grey, Miguel, about who is advocating for the interest of the producer when there's a misalignment between what the producer needs and what the government is being lobbied by big corporations to represent and to force upon the people. Where does the ICO do anything there?
I will go back to the assumption earlier. I see that point, and I see that is something that could be, again, applied to not producing countries necessarily, but many large consuming countries, right? But I think that going back to that example of Brazil, you can see reflected there, if you want to measure progress by how many farmers are profitable, or what percentage of the coffee, of the price, the FOB price goes to the producer, what support from the government exists for farmers. I think that if we measure things like that, then it's like a great success. Thinking about coffee, right? About the topic of coffee, farmers being profitable. So the larger discussion about consuming and big ag, and that goes beyond Brazil and just in general globally, it's a different point. But I think that there are many ways and many things to analyze and to see about what a government can do and cannot do. I think that for too long in coffee we have not seen the potential of the opportunity there.
Mm-hmm.
I've been working in coffee for 20 years. We barely did anything with the government, but the good that can come from a concerted effort in which several key partners of the coffee sector, in this case public and private, right, governments and companies, can come together with civil society organization that's observer providing a key role in all of this, working together towards something big and good for coffee, such as living income for coffee farmers. I think that for me, where I try to focus in like the opportunity. Mm-hmm. If we could accomplish that goal that I say for 2030, that half of the coffee producing countries are closing the living income gap because they understand what the living income gap is. They know what strategies can be implemented. They're implementing it with support from companies, from international organizations. That is huge. And so I think that at the same time, by the way, we start for working on the issues. We work on regulations, especially, with eudr and everything that come up from the European Union, how we support farmers in countries with implementation of eudr and many other things. We try to have those policy discussions beyond this. But in these cases, we were talking about living income. We see that as a major goal and with a great potential of bringing an actual partnership between the companies and governments as something that can help us to move the needle on that topic.
We could have this conversation and this specific thing for about 3 days solid. So we're going to wrap up this episode and we are going to have the next discussion. Join us for the next episode, folks, where we're going to talk about who the stakeholders are that are involved in determining what a living income is. I'm very interested in understanding this. Join us. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, friends. Please don't forget to show us some love by subscribing, liking, commenting, and most of all, sharing this podcast with your friends. Check the show notes for links, including our sponsors and our Patreon. And stay tuned for more great conversations on the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward.